Good morning, buongiorno. Welcome to the ABCs of Digital Transformation podcast. Today we have a very special guest, Emily Coburn.
Thank you.
Thank you for accepting the invitation, Emily. And we are going to be talking about an industry sector that is fascinating and has many challenges. The food sector, the entire food industry, which is highly regulated all over the world. And Emily is an expert in all things compliance, everything that has to do with the regulatory aspects so that companies can operate and comply with all those rules. Emily, tell me a little about your service proposition. What does it consist of? How do clients who are part of that sector benefit? What things do they need? What challenges do they face?
Great. Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me to your podcast today. I think this initiative you have is excellent. Well, we work mainly with companies that manufacture food, eh? We also work with food distributors and importers based here in the United States, eh? Mainly what we ensure is that they comply with the regulatory part that applies to them. Here in the United States, there are two main regulatory entities, which are the FDA and the Department of Agriculture, known as USDA. This country, and at least we also have state entities that oversee, at the state level, the regulatory part for everything that has to do with manufacturing.
In addition to the federal issue, each state can have a different rule.
Yes, correct. Because in the case of Florida, which is where we are currently located, it is the Florida of at least agriculture. That's what it's supposed to be. Well, our services are mainly to ensure that anyone who is starting a project, such as manufacturing food, manufacturing plants, food distributors or importers, comply with that regulatory part. It's like the main thing. Of course. Why? Because it's the mandatory part for any business that wants to do it.
And can a company in that area do it without the help of a consultant like your company?
Yes. Technically, yes, of course.
They go online and try to follow all the Bugsy rules. And they are supposed to be able to comply with players.
It is possible, it is not impossible, but it is quite tedious. It requires a lot of resources, requires a lot of time, knowledge. It took us years to get to the point where we are today, because there are many laws, there are many gray areas in the laws. So it is really precisely because of that time and that insecurity that a company can have, that they resort to basically hiring a consultant.
Generally, in the area of food and health in general, there are many regulations due to the risk that this implies. I understand that there are some key terms that need to be handled, which is the whole issue, for example, collecting a product that went bad, making a corner, and for that you have to have a traceability issue and be able to manage the batch throughout this entire chain. What areas are these services that you offer in? For example, do you have anything to ensure traceability?
Yes, well, apart from regulatory services, we also offer plant certification services. There are many plants that want, for example, to get into large trailers, such as Costco, Whole Foods, etc. And for that, they already need a certification above and beyond the regulatory part. Those certifications and also the FDA requests and requires that you have a traceability process. For those who don't know what traceability means, it's basically managing and having documented the batch numbers of the raw materials you use, in which finished product you used it, what was the batch number of the finished product, where you used it, and to whom you sold that finished product. So we, in that regulatory process of regulatory guidance that we offer, and also for certification services, one of the things we implement is these traceability systems.
And when we talk about this issue of the batch number, I imagine that it is associated with the expiration date.
Not necessarily, but what is most used currently, because the expiration date of a product is not mandatory. It is from a regulatory point of view for all products, only for some. Many people use the expiration date as an internal batch number, or you can also use the manufacturing date as a batch number.
And I understand that within this important industry sector, traceability forward and backward, if the origin of the products is from start to finish?
Of course, because in case you get a rich and you have to collect product from the market, it can come to you for two reasons. It can come to you because the raw material you used was contaminated, adulterated, or because your finished product has been contaminated or adulterated in your plant. Then you have to be able to check back to find out what ingredient you used, or check forward to find out which customer received that batch number. It's a public health issue.
In other words, it's essential. That's why there is so much control in the rest of the world. Who is in charge? The ministries of health?
Yes, normally,
And
yes.
you always have a certificate number to be able to put that product on
It
the
depends.
market.
For example, here in the United States, one day you are assigned a number. If you want, for example, to process meat products, you need to be inspected by the Department of Agriculture, fill out 6 reports for control, and that means that the FDA assigns you a number as a plant. The only number that can be assigned to you is in your plant registration. Your food product manufacturing plant has to be registered, and you have your specific number assigned to your plant and to your address.
And usually, as always, there is a negative aspect, positive aspect of doing things. I understand that the negative aspect is that if you have a problem, you will eventually be fined. And I think it is even public. You go to the FDA and there's a list of all the companies that have been fined because their product had salmonella.
If that information is public, obviously. I imagine that, by the nature of all of us as human beings, we want to do things right, especially if there's a risk of death of someone due to having stopped controlling something specific in your manufacturing process. Therefore, I believe that the tendency of every plant owner is to do things right and comply with regulations. There are some cases where it is not because they lack resources or something like that. But if your product is adulterated, the FDA can get it before it reaches the market and penalize you. They can close your plant. There are 1,001 things that can happen. So the tendency, both for altruism and for the protection of your brand, is to do things right, comply with the regulations, and from a business point of view,
From a marketing point of view, having more certifications gives you prestige and allows you to enter the market. It's like you mentioned, the big chains give you access to a certain business that the rest of your competition won't be able to do. If it's not certified, right? That ends up being a differentiator.
100%, right? Yes, 100% today, companies are opting for these certifications that are known, that are accredited by GFSI. There are several codes that can be implemented to obtain these certifications. Here in the United States, the most well-known is Skyhub 6 Colony Foods. In Europe, FSC 22000 is used in Latin America. All of these certifications are accredited by this universal or international entity known as GFSI. That is, when you have that certification, we always sell it to our clients, not only because you will be able to enter all of these large retailers, but because it will really organize your manufacturing process. It will give you added value. It will make you more efficient, more effective. You will be able to sleep more peacefully at night because you know that they have the controls necessary to ensure a product that is generally safe.
Well, in my world of technology, we talk about best practices. In your world, we also talk about implementing best practices.
Yes, you can implement the regulatory part, and on top of that, good practices or best practices.
So you have a basic, intermediate, and correct level, and you can do it gradually.
Yes, we always recommend doing it this way. In fact, there are companies that take a long time to implement everything, and then they are in a hurry because a client came to them and asked them to implement the equity certification right away. So we are always trying to educate small business owners, small companies to start right away with the regulatory process that already gives you a super solid base. Especially now with the new modification of the FDA regulation, it is ensuring that everyone already has their controls in place to ensure that the product they manufacture is safe. And then you can start growing progressively.
How much difference is there between a company that is an importer, someone who is bringing products from Italy, Spain, and they bring, pasta sauce, wines, to a company that is manufacturing in the United States?
Precisely because of what I mentioned a little while ago. There was a modification and an update of all the FDA regulations, which is known as modernization. And that brought about a number of new regulations, new rules, and so on. One of the things that it did as a change is that any product that is imported into the United States has to be manufactured under the same standards as if the product were being manufactured.
Standardize.
Exactly. So now the importer has the responsibility of verifying that the foreign supplier complies with the FDA regulations. And in fact, every foreign supplier who's going to import a product from the United States has to register with the FDA, and the FDA will go and inspect them.
But will they be inspected here or in your country?
In your country?
Really? Because they have allies who do this.
Yes. Well, the FDA will handle that in 1,000 ways. But if they are opening more and more alliances and offices...
Perfect to also protect those who are producing here. Because if you are being required to have a level of quality that implies a certain amount of costs, there would be unfair competition.
Exactly.
It's great that that exists. And do you think there is a kind of roadmap or plan that you offer where you say to go in phases, as you just said? Because doing everything will probably be overwhelming. You can't do all the certifications, even in the time it takes.
Yes. First of all, because as I said before, the implements the regulatory part, and I recommend this not only because the implementation process will be smoother, or more of the implementation process, but also because you will be implementing a culture of full safety in your company. And that is not something that changes overnight. That's the hardest thing to change in any company, is the culture of your employees. How they think, So what I always say, if you're opening a business or using a new plant, start right away with the regulatory part. Implement all the controls, little by little add more layers, more layers of security, optimize your processes, hire people with a profile that is more suitable for handling some types controls that are a bit more critical, and then, little by little, start aiming to obtain these international certifications.
In other words, it is something that ends up being much more complete because it is not just this. Here, you have a process. Implementing a culture is not a minor issue.
Always.
Because there's always resistance. How do you manage to accompany this process? A matter of constantly checking is a follow-up job.
One of the things I always ensure is that we are there. At the plant, we are offering a completely personalized service. And the reason we are there is not only so that we are seen and have an image, but really to be able to teach people the reason for the controls we are implementing. What could happen if we stopped implementing that control? And that gives a greater sense of responsibility to the employees. And the moment they understand why things flow, they flow much more.
And this, of course, in relation to your clients. Now, internally, as an entrepreneur who is in this segment, do you have a portfolio of services that I imagine you do to go and position? You have something that depends on each business model, and you tell them, this is the menu of everything you can do. For example, I remember that you once told me something about hygiene issues, and that is a particular service. When can you list a little bit what the rules would be?
The controls, of course, every plant is a world. Of course, it is not as if there is a specific package. It depends more than anything on the type of product you're making. First of all, the regulatory part. If you're making meat products, then the regulations that apply. If you're making non-meat products, then you're making sure you comply with the FDA regulations. So all that regulatory part can be divided into two different branches. The programs that we offer in this case are all what is known as prerequisite programs that involve training, employees, allergen control, cleaning and sanitation, good manufacturing practices, and developing ASAP program, which means doing analysis and critical control points. And it is to analyze physical
and chemical risks.
Correct.
And that applies to both. Basically. So, as a kind of segmentation, and it says, I want to serve these clients, and you specialize in one or either of the two.
For now, because we both already have many specializations. Yes, we have. We have had many experiences in different types of food manufacturing. Whether it be food, juices, catfish, a bit of everything.
And we have a diagnostic service, and then an implementation and support service.
Yes, the second type of service that we offer is the certifications that I talked about, GFSI certifications. And one of the main things that we do at the beginning is to do a gap assessment and see, okay, these are the requirements that you have to meet, that's all. And at the infrastructure level, we do a tour of the entire plant, and then we do a complete report of everything that needs to be done into product flow changes, wall coverings, floor coverings, etc. And then obviously there's the whole documentation part, program implementation, etc. More to come.
Well, that's all right.
There are many more services. We offer label review services that have to comply with FDA regulations, or service for importers who have to ensure that they verify international suppliers even before they have already lost product.
Do you have to do it before?
Do you have to test them before?
Do you have to test them before to avoid any risk? Or is it a condition for being able to bring
It
it
is
in?
necessary. It is mandatory.
If not, will they not let you through custom?
They may let you through, but if not, they inspect you and you don't have it, they can penalize you. So the correct thing is for you to implement a pre-import approval.
For those who are listening to us, we are talking about the issue of compliance. Due to the complexities with the hemorrhaging being translates into due process, and that everywhere in the world there is a checklist that has to be fulfilled. I remember that in Latin America they asked us, and I don't want to go into the technological issue yet, but there was a big risk that a product that had not gone through all those permits would be put on the market. So workflows were implemented so that people could approve that everyone had fulfilled their part. The master data was created, the new product, and each one had to comply with a step, and that checklist was automatically signed until the product did not comply with it. There was an exit block. So does something similar apply here? Is there really a manual checklist for a product to be able to exit?
Yes, there is. It depends on the risk of the product and the controls that you implement. You should have what is known as a review, which is to verify that all the controls that the product had to go through have been passed and then sign the release. Product then technically becomes available for sale. The way each company does it varies. There are people who have it, and here we can get into the topic of digital transformation, but there are people who can do it by hand and there are people who can do it digitally. That depends.
No. Well, I love that we are getting into this topic because we are in the ABC of digital transformation. In your opinion, how different can the process and productivity of a company that is working with the right technologies be from one that is not using the right technology?
That is a very interesting conversation. I always try to have it at the time I'm starting a project, especially for large certifications, like a company. Many companies try to start doing everything on paper or in Excel or in software that covers the accounting part, right? To be able to carry all the information we're talking about and nothing else. If you want to focus only on the traceability part, which is the handling of batch numbers, it is a process as complex as you want it to be, or as easy as you want it to be, depending on the tool you are using. There are companies that choose to use accounting systems, and there are companies that implement business management systems.
Exactly.
I always recommend, obviously, that they implement an ERP. An ERP not only allows you to handle the accounting part, but it also has integrated modules where you can keep track of all the batch numbers of your product, your raw materials, the logistics of your entire company, and you can add a management system to it. Integrate it so that the entire data management process is efficient and fast.
I imagine that the person who took it by hand will have a little notebook attached to it. And when he gets to the reception and starts reading the label and starts writing down the batch by hand as is and then transcribing it in Excel.
Sometimes they don't even bring them. So what's the problem? And we're really focusing again just on traceability. How important is it to get information quickly and effectively? On a particular lot number, if you get a nice okay, and that means that some product was adulterated and it got to the market, or it didn't comply with a regulatory part, and you have to take it off the market. The FDA is going to come, okay. You have an obligation to notify the FDA within 24 hours to find out whatever happened. And the FDA is going to ask you for all the information about what the scope of your product is. And obviously, you as a company, what was the reason that the product was adulterated?
Where do you distribute it?
Where did you destroy it, or where did it come from? What was the reason that the product was adulterated? So, as a company, you want to have that information as soon as possible to prevent the product from reaching the consumer.
In other words, it's the ability to react. How do I get that information if I have to start looking for papers to see which batches were eventually used in that batch that was produced? And doing that by hand can be a pain.
It can be a headache. It can be a super slow process if you skip the 24 hours. And in fact, many of these certifications that I'm talking about give you a maximum time period. And in fact, when the auditor is going to inspect you, the audit tells you, okay, you have so many hours to be able to give me all the information on this particular batch number.
And that's part of your job, to train him to be able to respond.
Yes.
What are they called? Mock reports.
Yes.
I mean, it's basically a simulation.
It's a simulation. And today, most companies do it at least once a year to ensure that the traceability system is working. So, from the point of view of digital transformation, what would be my 100% recommendation? if they have the resources and implement a system or something that allows them to digitize all that data, to have the information as soon as possible.
Well, I want to tell you something because this is a spoiler. This is like telling something that many people don't know. We have many clients in common. We are fortunate to serve the same clients, each one from their own angle. And that's how we met, and it's interesting. It's good that we have 4 clients in common, I think. And the truth is that part of the interesting thing about this process is that we have come to understand the industry, food, and learning from those practices that Emily implements. And besides, she tells us, hey, I have clients, they are doing this by hand. You don't know how much time it takes to give that information about that. Plentroin, when you tell her, please give me this, because it is what the regulatory body is going to ask you at a given moment. And it is not capable in capacity to give that answer. And throughout the entire chain. From the point of view of digital transformation, what Emily mentioned, I have talked about in other podcasts. An ERP, which is a business management system, is made up of the classic supply chain that includes the purchasing process, receipt of inventory, everything that has to do with transfers, inventory within the physical inventory. Then when it is sold, you have to go through the whole process of collecting, packing, shipping, which would be the pick and delivery. And throughout that whole process, those who are in the warehouse, if I am going to receive a purchase order, that product that was sent to me, when we have a management system solution with a device that is going to scan a barcode, if I am going to use the supplier's barcode and you correct me on anything that has to do with food, in particular, if I read the product code and I read the barcode, it has already gone to the system and I know that I have that product, and when I start to produce it, I have to go and pick up the raw materials. I move them. That's why there's an inventory transfer. And when I close the production order, all the raw materials are unloaded from the inventory. They become part of this new finished product. But it is tied that all these batches are the same as the batch of the finished product. And when I sell it, I have to go and pick up the finished product. I have to read it. I often have to pick different products, put them on pallets, pack them, and I also have to label them exactly. And then do all of that by hand. You have to make sure that the batch number of the raw material that you received, then you moved it to the floor, then you put it in that production order, and then that was the one that you sent to each system. And every time you transcribe all that number, and if you get a number wrong,
you lose all traceability.
Exactly. Imagine if.
And that is important. Trying to do it with tools that digitize and minimize human error.
There are challenges within the world of digital transformation. When you get out of this supply chain, you enter the extended supply chain, which is when you begin to integrate with your client. And then you have to send the product to where the knowledge that you can apply and know who is responsible for it reaches. Because I have heard of cases of potential clients that we are handling right now who bring vegetables or herbs. They have them here in Miami. They send them to New York. And it turns out that the product arrives in New York and the client says that the product arrived bad because the cold chain was broken. Whose responsibility is it?
It is a gray area. It's a very gray area. Yes, it depends how you do it. In fact, you have to. There are companies that choose to do legal documents where you do a preliminary inspection, do the Lowry on the truck, that's as far as you can take pictures, etc. And that's where my responsibility ends. If the truck is yours, the cold chain is your responsibility. Well, that's part of your contract, isn't it? That's why nowadays there are also digital devices that you can put in trucks and that give you a whole temperature curve, right? Of course, that also helps to maintain the cold chain and also to have a record saying that I kept my product under the conditions that were optimal.
Of course, if we are talking about technologies that have to do with the Internet of Things, with radio frequency, chips are put on the pallet, chip is put on the truck's refrigerator that notifies you if the temperature goes below a threshold to notify you and know exactly which pallets and all the batches were there at that time. And the same thing is already happening inside the plants. You can now have the Internet of Things inside your refrigerator.
All the plants. Well, these are technologies that are no longer so expensive, and in all the coolers, that is one of the things that we always put in place, naturally in any plant. Place a data logger, and immediately you will know, and you will receive an alarm on your cell phone in case there's a temperature deviation.
Yes, and sometimes the same thing happens to me, since we already know so much about these issues. As ours, the data loggers, would basically be the ones that capture all the information. They are reading computers that are reading all the things that the refrigerator and the plant are transmitting, and this is collecting this data and storing it. Many times it leaves it in a cloud environment, and from there one decides to send a notification to the technician's phone because the refrigerator is faulty. From there, they took that temperature and uploaded it directly to the system, because here, recording the temperature throughout the entire chain.
Signing the reports is also part of a process of internal verification of all these certifications and controls.
And how up-to-date are your clients?
In general, look, most people want to reach a point of digitalization because they know what the efficiency of having something already digitalized is. Small businesses are now being legalized by recent generations, and they are people who are already 100% integrated into technology. So, from the start, they want to implement everything digitally, and all the forms that they have to fill out, they want to do it from tablets, as they are already used to that. When you go to older companies, and they are still small, everything is still done by hand.
And while many of those family businesses will have a change theme, generation that also goes elements.
So I think that in the end, everyone will go to the same trend. Everyone will go to the digital transformation.
And now, from your point of view of your business, what is the name of your company?
MCOS.
MCOS. How important is digital transformation for you, and what is your transformation plan?
Well, the digital tools that we currently use are mainly to have key information for security reasons. All the documentation that we develop, to have backups, etc. And also to be able to share all this documentation with our clients. That is like the main tool, and we also often carry out audits and remote audits. In many cases where we can analyze the data and we can go through a software, analyze all the results and all the forms that they have filled out over a period of time of 6 months for.
And are there niche solutions for the service that you offer?
Yes, of course. Nowadays there are many softwares that can be used, and there are companies that even choose to do it themselves.
Ask indiscreetly and plans to generate their own software.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, we have many plans for many things that we have ahead of us that are interesting, and well, we'll see.
Today, for all of us entrepreneurs who are listening to us every time we have such a different proposal, the motto is it worth it? One knows that there are thousands of software on the market, and then one lacks the other is incomplete in this, and one says, can't be that there are so many incomplete solutions, and one ends up deciding to create one to be able to satisfy this gap that is in the market. I imagine that with everything that you have seen, you have already identified the opportunity. But well, we are not going to share that right now. Let's move on to talk a little about the vision of the future, about the trend. What you are seeing exists, such as dates, milestones, deadlines, plans that will occur in particular within the United States, which will force companies to hurry to keep up.
Well, companies already have to be in compliance with the regulation, and most of what emerged through the signature is already in force. The last rule that was published is the modification they made to the traceability section that grants them additional requirements for certain types of product. And yes, basically every company that manufactures, distributes, or imports food has a lot of responsibility from or as a result of that, and it has to be working for 2 years now.
For 2 years?
Yes.
And is there a deadline or not? It has already expired.
The deadline has already closed.
I mean, once again, even if they are it by hand, they still have to.
They can do it 100%.
But they have the same responsibility, regardless.
The only thing that will change is that it will take them longer to get the information, and they have to have a backup. Anyone who keeps these records by hand, we always recommend that they scan them and upload them to the cloud just in case. If something happens, you don't lose information.
Something I love about what you mentioned is that those who listen to us will probably be companies that are here in the United States importing, or people who are in Latin America, in Europe, who want to export food. And this will apply to them exactly the same. So it's worth doing your research, because the United States is the largest market in the world, and they are going to have to comply with this rule. So well, they are starting to prepare themselves to be able to have that possibility. There is a question out of curiosity. And from the point of view of this e-commerce trend, I imagine that everyone is going to sell online.
It is a new trend, yes, and especially as a result of COVID, many companies changed their business model and began selling directly to consumers online, and even through large platforms that already buy from small companies. And what they do is make the product available online.
And are the rules the same, or is there any particular one?
When you sell directly to the consumer, most of the regulations do not apply to you. However, I do believe that there will be a change in that because the scope is already huge. Before, direct sales to the consumer were a little less risky because of the scope, but the business model is changing, and the scale
Is now becoming a great opportunity.
Yes, I do believe that there will be a fundamental change in the part that we call when you sell directly to the consumer.
Okay, that's good for us. Well, in the technological world, the internet, when you have the product on the market, which is the product, in the store you arrived and you have a point of sale, you grabbed the product and you took it away. The other option would be online sales, which is through a marketplace or an online store. And in either case, something we already have are clients who are selling multi-channel. So they create their own Magento store, Shopify Commerce, they create their own store, and then put their product on Amazon, eBay, Mercado Libre. And there are a number of challenges because now you have to update the inventory in all the stores so as not to oversell because it's an inventory published at the time of starting to sell. The others are not updated automatically. And this is a challenge. And you also have to start sharing traceability. But it's the point where the tracking is, did I send it to you this way? Where is it going? Yes, and I think that a world of opportunities is being created because they are starting to sell cold foods that have to be put in containers, in beans, in boxes with dry ice, and sent so that they arrive safely from here to California.
Okay, one of the things that we do recently, which we were doing with our clients, is to do temperature validation studies. Okay, what is the worst case scenario where you can send your product? From the point of view of climate and distance, and you put temperature sensors inside and you go molding. You make a curve to see if, under the worst transformation conditions, the product actually reaches the temperature it needs to reach.
How good. And this is Emily, entrepreneur. Is it a challenge to have a vision of where I want to go? How am I going to grow? Having a business plan when I'm going to hire people. How many clients do I want? Where do you want to go with the company? How big do you want clients to be?
To be honest, no, there is no limit. What I do like is to always do things right. And one of the big challenges I have now is to understand how fast to grow. What is the ideal balance in the growth equation? Whether it's good to grow little by little and safely, or whether it's good to grow exponentially and taking risks, right? It's one of the questions I always have, and I'm working hard on it.
If you know that what you share is key, because usually in that vision, there are companies that say, I want to be a boutique company. I want to be a specialized company. I want to be recognized as the best company in the Miami area. And it is valid, and I am the lid of the jar. I am the best in this area, or I identify a small problem that I can solve at a national level. But then there's the balance of how many services I really have to offer. As the broader the portfolio, the more complicated it is to grow. Beyond that, you have all this added value, or you specialize in small one. And how is that selection going?
Not for now. For now. I think the way we see it is that we are now focused here in Florida. We have clients in Latin America, there are clients in other states, but our focus now has been here, and it has been like the core of our business. And the idea is, little by little, to open, not to expand, opening offices in other states, help the Latin American market. One of the things I am most passionate about in my business is teaching. I do a lot of training that is required by the FDA, and I am very passionate about being able to bring that to Latin America, right? And because there is a lack of knowledge and there is a lack of information between what the regulations are here in the United States and what applies there. And many times they call us completely without knowing what applies to them, and what they want is to be able to process and make the product well in order to export. So yes, I would love to have the opportunity to open offices there.
Well, that's part of what motivated me when you said, hey, I like your podcast, and I called it ABC, because sometimes, from the point of view of access to information, We are infoxicated. Tell you, there is so much information, sometimes we don't even know how to consume it. We don't know where to start when we talk about technology. And it surely happens to you in your industry sector. He says, there are so many certifications that I don't know where to start.
Yes.
And the idea of having an expert who tries to explain it in the simplest possible way is essential. And not everyone has that expert at home. Not everyone has the advisor who lets you know where to start this. This is too much for me. And there's a phrase that I always repeat, and that is to think big, start small, do it quickly, and want to have all the certifications. I think what I shared with you today is essential, which is to have a plan, to do at least the regulatory part. Then the rest of the certifications, knowing that you can count on an expert who will make that diagnosis to see what is the gap that you have to close, who will accompany you, who will help you in the change of culture. I think that what you are doing is having an ally, can also do it here in Latin America, so that you can enter this market.
100%.
I think that the proposal of what you are doing has been very clear, and I think that with this personalized service, and with this comprehensive understanding, you should have a presence everywhere.
Well, I hope so. That's what we're aiming for, 100%.
Emily, I'm glad to have you on the podcast, and I think we could do it again.
Thanks to you. A pleasure.
But repeat it to talk about other topics.
100%. Yes, there are many things to talk about, 100%.
I think choosing just one certification, doing it in a comprehensive way, in terms of process, culture, and technology, would be something we could do again.
Well, I would love you.
Well, to talk to Emily again about all the topics. Thanks for being here.
Great.
Thank you all for joining us.